IGS is a BIM specialist working with various forms of software, so we're pretty not limited, pretty unlimited with the things that we can do, but what we do focus on predominantly is BIM content creation, so creating content for projects, either for manufacturers, which is our primary part of our market, but also for either architectural engineering firms that maybe don't have their skills maybe aren't quite to the level that they would like, so we'll create content for them and do some project documentation. We do a lot of BIM education, so for companies that are entering the BIM space for the first time, so mainly manufacturers, they sort of go, okay, industry's telling us we need BIM, what the hell is BIM, what do we need to do, how does this affect us? We educate them as much as we actually provide them with the service. We teach them what BIM is so that they can make decisions for themselves about how BIM relates to them, how much they want to invest and how they can integrate it into their own strategy. We also do a lot of BIM software plugins, so that's add-ins for things like predominantly for Revit. One of our major clients is Dulux, so if anyone's seen the plugin for Revit that's done by Dulux, we created that for them. It's a pretty big team that goes into putting together a plugin for software for Revit. It's not BIM, it's BIM plus it's Revit plus it's coding plus it's a whole lot of strategy sort of things. So it's a pretty big team. We also do scan to BIM, which is basically taking a point cloud and then converting that into in Revit, a model that can actually then be used to move forward in the project. Okay, so a bit of a background on supplier specified communication objectives. So probably just to reiterate what Matt said before, by all definition, until recently I was a marketing person. I spent 8+ years working at a company called Britex. You'll see that name come up a lot in this presentation because I can use it and I have it on file, use it as a case study. We're actually a manufacturer of stainless steel products. So we would do anything from fitting out a hospital with bespoke stainless steel joinery. We also manufactured a lot of Me Too type items, so things like basins and troughs and toilets and urinals and all sorts of different type products. So we had a pretty broad entry into the AEC market doing a whole lot of different things. And over the last 3 or 4 years, we sort of got wind of BIM and I sort of dived headlong into that space and now basically want to try and help other companies do what we did. So let's talk a bit about the supplier specified communication objectives. So I often talk to manufacturers about one of the most important things to consider is the time taken to research, assess, select and document products. As a manufacturer and in both sides of the process, so as the person that's specifying and the person that's handing over that information, you want to decrease that as much as possible. If you're the documenter, you don't want to be spending 3 hours documenting a single product in a building that you're trying to design that has thousands and thousands of products in it. You want that time to be as quick as possible. Time is money. And as a manufacturer, to make your product as attractive as possible, you want to make that process really, really short. You want to make it really easy. You want to make it really accurate. So the things that a manufacturer probably wants to take into consideration are, first of all, brand awareness. You need to know that the specifier needs to know that you exist. You also want to promote the aesthetic qualities of your products, so you want to make them look as good as possible because a lot of it does come down to aesthetics. You want to demonstrate the capability, so you want to be able to tell them what certifications your product has, what standards it meets. If there's particular performance criteria that your product has, you want to be able to demonstrate that. You want to demonstrate the variables, so can it come in left hand and right hand? Can it come in multiple colours? Is there different formats that the product can come in? You want to be able to coordinate product data, so that's basically merging the product geometry with the product data, so things like product codes and those sort of things. You want to be able to provide technical support, so often that's things like troubleshooting, extra technical criteria that maybe you're not using to specify the product, but maybe that you're using to assess it further down the track. And then obviously providing specification documentation tools, so that might be things like anything that would help the specifier document your product. So that might be providing CAD, BIM content, it might be just writing text so that can be copied and pasted into a specification schedule. Anything that they might need to actually document your product in a project. Okay, so talk a bit about communication of the past. I'm not going to talk about 1920s and 30s. I'm going to talk about the past as in, maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago. This industry's moved a lot with technology in the last few years, so I'm not going to go back too far. So image on the left is something that's pretty common to a lot of architecture and engineering practices. It's a massive, massive library of catalogues. If you're lucky, they'll be in some order and organised quite well. There might even be a librarian who is employed full-time to manage this process. It's enormous. Most of them that I've ever seen over my time, it's almost joked about what a mess it is and how it's not up to date and how the catalogues are all wrong and all this sort of stuff. On the right-hand side there is a data sheet that is pretty commonplace for inside these catalogues. You might get an image, you might get some, technical information about what it can do, what it can't do, some product codes, potentially a few drawings, maybe a plan section and elevation. But the amount of information that you can include in one of these data sheets is so limited. When we first started designing this catalogue, we thought that this had so much information in it, but the more and more, particularly when you're a bespoke manufacturer like we were, trying to demonstrate variables in like the space of a back to front A4 sheet is just nigh on impossible. And just when you think you've got the last bit of data in there, someone rings up and says, oh, what about this, and can it do that, and tell me more about that. It's just so limited in what you can do. One of the other major drawbacks or two things that stand out about catalogues as being a drawback. One, it's incredibly wasteful. The amount of paper and waste and everything that goes into producing these things is just enormous. Trying to deliver them, people have to drive around in their cars and drop them off, and how can I come in and update a catalogue? How can I come in? It's just full on. And anytime you make a change, if we update a data sheet, trying to get around and update them is just unrealistic. It's impossible. So that's something that is slowly phasing out. When I was at Britex, we used to get calls probably towards the end, maybe weekly, saying, hey, we're moving to digital, our library's going, we need the space, we're not really fans of printed literature anyway, can you come and pick it up, otherwise it's going in the recycling bin. One of the things which categorise the past of a specifier-supplier relationship is a lot of personal contact. I know, particularly people I worked with that had been in the industry for 20 odd years, most of the architects knew their reps by name. They frequently would come in, they'd go for a coffee, whatever the case was. People just seem to have more time. And also too, I think the industry is becoming much more competitive now. In a lot of categories, there was maybe only one or two suppliers and mostly Australian manufacturers, that were targeting a specific part of the market. Whereas now there just seems to be 30 suppliers for every single product category because of the importation and all that sort of stuff. So one of the things that was really good about this was that suppliers then had a really intimate knowledge about what their clients wanted. People in their categories as suppliers were experts. They knew what building code their products applied to. They knew exactly how the product was used. They knew how it was documented. They knew all this sort of stuff. Now there's a real disjoint in relationship because everyone just wants to be able to download something off a website and put it into their project. A lot of the people that I work with and a lot of the reps that I knew had very little understanding of what their clients actually wanted, because no one wanted to have appointments, which I understood because someone from, I think, a company like Hassel once told me, they said, do you know how many reps ring us up and say, can I come and have an appointment? Can I come and do a demonstration? There wouldn't be enough hours in the working year to see all the reps, let alone do your job. So, looking at it from both sides of the fence, we understand this, but it also has a lot of drawbacks in that the suppliers aren't learning much about what you guys actually would want. And when I say you guys, I mean specifiers and contractors even. Everyone's time poor. No one wants to speak to the suppliers anymore unless they really, really have to. Sort of moved a little bit to trade shows, try and simplify things a bit and say, okay, rather than having 10,000 suppliers come in and see me each year, let's just put them all in a room for 2 days and we'll just go around and see what we're interested in, which is a pretty good idea in theory. However, one of the things that's happening now is people are too busy to even leave the office. A lot of architects and engineers say, I just don't have time to go to this trade show. Trade shows, in my opinion, are dying a very fast death. I would be really interested to see how many trade shows get attended by architects and engineers and construction professionals these days, as opposed to maybe 5 to 10 years, or maybe 10 years ago. I think they were probably reasonably prominent. These days, it's just not happening. Most of the big brands don't even turn up anymore, which I think I maybe authorised one in my 8 or so years at Britex, and then I never did another one. Tools and samples. You see also in a lot of practices a room full of samples. So whether they be, that first picture is actually from a museum, believe it or not. I think that's actually one of the first things done by Laminex, which is different swatches. The next one sort of is like a Dulux colour swatch, and you've got different flooring. You've got some metal samples, you've got some carpet samples, all this sort of stuff, which is actually great. And I call this the past, but I think this is still happening and it still needs to happen. And I think having that hands-on, first-hand experience with this sort of stuff is really important. A lot of people these days are really trained not to feel like this. You know, they just want to download something from a website, show me a picture, show me a 3D model, I've got it, I know it, it's in the project. I think this stuff needs to keep relevant, and it needs to be maintained. Mr. Rumbelow suggested this to me. It's before my time to some degree, showing my young age a little bit, I guess. It is, however, something that does get talked about a little bit when people talk about, you know, the industry moving in CAD and then to BIM and then all this sort of stuff. But people still have this connection to say, remember when Chrome used to give out the stencils? And then people talk about, remember when Chrome first started giving us CAD blocks? You know, we sort of mentioned before, someone needs to break through the ceiling and take a risk and invest in something that's maybe not, you know, the norm. Someone has to take that step and make everyone else go, geez, this worked and this is great and people love this, and move forward. I think this is awesome, and in many ways it has the ability to be the precursor of BIM, I guess, but this is pretty cool. Talk about the present. Of course, a lot of this stuff, you know, blends through all past, present, and future. I'm just sort of using a bit of poetic license here, but group presentations, and this is a classic. I love this photo. This is awesome. This is your classic morning tea. This is awesome. This is where the supplier comes in and says, oh, look, you know, I want to come and do a presentation. It's like, yeah, what's the sweetener? I'll bring in some muffins and some coffee and some orange juice and all this sort of stuff. And the premise here is it's no longer a one-to-one, you know, having a supplier come in and meet with a particular architect or whatever. It's like, okay, how can we make this more efficient? Let's get 10 people in the room at once. So you're only getting one presentation, one lot of time, and we keep moving forward. These are great, I guess, because they're kind of like a little workshop and everyone gets to ask questions, and the manufacturer gets a good time efficiency too, so they don't have to come in 20 different times to meet with 20 different people. They've got everyone in the room at once. But this is sort of something that's still happening quite a lot. It is moving forward even to another level now, where we have what they call these flexi lunches, where companies arrange for, say, 12 suppliers to come in. They put on some pizza, and then, you know, during the lunch break, all the architects go around, they grab a piece of pizza, they have a look at all the suppliers, and they go back to their desk, and 20 minutes later, the whole thing's over. It's really quite amusing to see how this stuff's progressing, because it really is. And just what the next one will be, who knows, but I'll get to that in a minute. Websites are obviously the most prominent form of communication that suppliers have with not just specifiers, but with all parts of industry now. It's a key weapon in a manufacturer's arsenal about all stages of the process that I referred to before. It's about making them aware. So, you know, obviously you have your products to be search engine optimized in Google and things like that. And really does give you a lot of flexibility to update data too. That's one of the things I always loved about the website as opposed to a catalogue. If we found an error, or if we changed the product or anything like that, modify it, re-upload the PDF, it's done. Anyone that accesses the product as of that moment is accessing the most current data. If we used to do it with a catalogue and everyone was using the catalogues, it might be 12 months before we even actually get every catalogue, you know, might be 10,000 of them out in the field, updated. So websites are a really great, flexible communication tool, and they do form the current and the foreseeable future of communication mediums. CAD Files is obviously another thing that's been happening a lot over the last probably 10 years or so. Being a manufacturer at Britex, the good thing for us was because we were working with CAD, providing CAD details was actually very easy for us. We had plan, section, elevation, drawings of all of our products because we made them ourselves. There's a lot of companies who are just suppliers, and I think that's a really interesting dynamic, and the industry calls them manufacturers. When we talk about suppliers, we say, oh, manufacturers, content, manufacturers, this. The reality is the vast majority of companies that are selling product here in Australia at the moment into the AEC are not manufacturers, they are suppliers. They are buying the product from another company overseas, either from a completely different company that they're not associated with, they're just a manufacturing company they purchase from, or maybe they're a head company, say in Europe, that's providing them data that might be in a completely different format, in a different language. If you're buying it from America, it's an imperial, not metric. You have no control over what you're asking for because you're a little fish in a very big pond. So that was always one of the things I always enjoyed about working at Australian manufacturers. We had total control over everything that we did. And until recently, this has always been, the have you got AutoCAD drawings for your product so we can click, drag, drop into our projects. We always did. It was great. Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about the future, which is basically, for all intents and purposes, BIM, because that's what I know. I'm a pure evangelist, a little bit different to Phil. I'm sucked in totally. I have to be. I own a company that services the BIM industry. I'd be in trouble if I didn't believe in it. So if we talk about the manufacturers moving into the BIM space, it's not easy. It's not just simply opening up your AutoCAD drawings or opening up your 3D models and putting a little bit of data in and saying, here, we've done BIM. It's really not that simple. It's very complex. The first thing to remember is that it's very expensive. It's a 100% marketing cost. Manufacturers at this point in time are not using BIM content in the process. They're using their own CNC software, or they're still using AutoCAD, or they're using whatever. The actual content they're creating for the AEC industry is not content they're using themselves. So it's a 100% marketing expense if you want to look at it like that. The important thing there, when we call it 100% marketing expense, is that by the very nature of what you're doing, you're actually adding overhead to your product. We talked before about manufacturers wanting to be specified in a project so they got more chance of getting the order. But by all definition, if you invest in something to help you get specified, you're just adding more to the bottom line, so that when it comes time to deal with the contractor and the contractor says, I've found a cheaper product, well, of course you have, because we're the ones that have invested in all the data that help the architect and the engineer and everyone coordinate the project. We can't be ones creating all of this awesome data and also be the cheapest. So it's a really interesting dynamic to say, well, how much do you invest to be helpful, when at the end of the day, if that's really pushing your product price right through the roof and the contractor comes in and says, mate, we're over budget, sorry, you're specified, you do have a good product, but the client, the manufacturer, the architect, everyone's looking for savings. It's a really unfortunate thing, but it's a real true consideration. Format selection. So as we mentioned before, Revit is not the only form of software that gets used by designers and contractors. So depending on your product, and depending on who your target market is, and depending on the type of projects that you're targeting, will vary a lot and will influence the decision that you make onto which formats you create your BIM content in, because we talk about IFC at the end here, which potentially would be the silver bullet, but the reality is it's not. You have to create native format content. So if you want to be able to service your clients that are using Revit, you need to create Revit content. If you want to service your clients that are using ArchiCAD, you've got to create ArchiCAD content. And it's not a matter of just open file, save as. They're all created from scratch in native geometry, native software. So you need to make those sort of decisions. Manufacturers, as I said before, they're not using this BIM platform internally, so they know nothing about it. So when you get BIM content created by, say, an external content creator, because you're not going to do it yourself, and it gets given back to them on a disk, how are they to judge if it's any good or not? They don't know anything about it. It's the only time when I first started doing it that I felt totally helpless contracting an external source, because if you ask someone to build a website for you, you can judge a website. Someone sends it back to you and says, here's your website, and you go, no, this looks terrible, it looks crap, I hate it. Or if someone creates a catalogue or a logo for you or something, we can all judge that, manufacturers have a complete inability to judge their BIM content that's been created for them. It might be terrible, it might be totally incorrect, it might not have any data integrated, it might be just a pretty looking 3D model. They wouldn't know. They don't even have the software to open up the files. So, you know, it's a really scary world, and it's a really big challenge, and it's a current issue within the industry, is that a lot of manufacturers are investing in BIM content, but if they then take that content to market, most of the architects and engineers that could potentially be the users wouldn't ever use it in a project. It's just terrible. Again, and even if the manufacturer then goes to the client and says, hey, I've got this BIM content created for us, can you have a look at it for me and tell me what you think? They come back and they say, oh, you know, blah, 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 nesting, blah, 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 purging, blah, 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 face-based, blah, 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 LOD, and the manufacturer just goes, I didn't understand a word you just said. You know, you've just given me this great feedback, but I'm sorry, I don't know what you were just saying to me. You might as well have been speaking a foreign language. So there's this real disconnect in this industry at the moment in that area. And then you'll go and ask one client to say, what did you think of these Revit families or these ArchiCAD objects or these SketchUp models that we've got done? You ask two different people, you get two completely different points of view. One of them will say there's too much detail, the other one will say there's not enough. One will say we want face-based, the other one will say we want non-hosted. It's such a wide subjective perspective on this sort of stuff, so the manufacturer then doesn't know where to go. It's not like a CAD file. A CAD file in a plan section elevation is either right or it's wrong. It's easy. There's no grey area with that. Building a Revit family is like saying build me a house. 2-story, 1-story, you know, high end, low end, how much detail do you want? These are actually things that I got told when I was at Britex. We don't use manufacturer specific content, so you've just wasted all your money because we'll never use it. Your content looks great, but it's useless to us because, or we prefer face-based or not face-based. So it's a challenging, you know, it's a challenging area. It's not the silver bullet, and not all the answers are known yet. One other thing I talked about before was potentially reduced interaction with clients. Is this good or bad? You know, you speak to a lot of architects or engineers and contractors, and they say, look, the best thing you can do is just have a really good website, have all the data at my fingertips, you know, make your products really easy to sort through, make the data clear. But that is having a flow-on effect where the suppliers are not becoming really, because they're not engaged in the process, they don't know as much, and they're not going to be there in the long term. You know, one day they're going to start asking questions and say, look, I don't know anything about my product. I'm working off the CAD files and the data sheets that were created 10, 20 years ago. I don't even know what material this is made out of half the time. So there is some drawbacks to this. In terms of BIM, measuring return on investment, is it working? Is it quantifiable? Are downloads and views relevant? You know, one of the big things I see in the industry is people say, oh, your models were downloaded 10,000 times. So what? Did one of them ever get used in a project? Were they going to specify us anyway? If I don't create Revit families or models, aren't they just going to document it for me in the project anyway? Why do I need to go and invest? If they want my product, they'll draw it themselves. The potential to damage your brand unwittingly. And as I said before, a lot of manufacturers don't know a lot about the BIM content they're creating. And there's a lot of, within the industry, there's a lot of manufacturers that are putting content out that everyone kind of jokes about and says, have you seen the content that these guys are doing? Geez, it's terrible. The manufacturer, I guarantee you, has absolutely no idea. They think that they've handed over this disk full of Revit or ArchiCAD or SketchUp or Vectorworks or MicroStation content, whatever it is. All they know is they've paid 10 grand for it, they've handed it over, and they think, oh, how good was that, eh? Client's going to be thrilled. Not really. A lot of the time they're not. A big shift too in this industry and in terms of BIM content is the manufacturers don't understand what BIM is and why these models are being used and how they're being used. So, you know, they might take like a SolidWorks or Inventor model that's like so detailed for manufacture and then convert that, God, I hate that word, into Revit families or whatever it is. So it's not native geometry to start with, but they keep all the geometry in there and it goes to the client and the client says, you've got too much data in here, too much geometry. And the manufacturer says, but last week you were telling me what's the dimension between this point and this point. for years, you guys have always said we want to know everything about your product, because if there's one bit of information we miss on a data sheet, or if there's a little bit on a drawing that we miss, it's always the one thing that you guys ask for. So isn't more data better? Isn't that what BIM is about? No, BIM isn't really about that. It's very confusing for manufacturers. They don't understand. They don't understand BIM, so they don't understand what it is they're trying to provide. Specify, okay, so now I'll talk about the benefits. So this is the good stuff. This is what I like. So one of the major things that I think is great, and sort of what Phil was talking about before, it sort of got my interest a little bit, is that rather than having to create something that someone else has told us that they want, we're telling them what they can have. And one of the beauties of 3D parametric models is that we can build constraints. You know, we can tell them if you change value X, what happens to value Y. Or we can say, you know, this product has mins and maxes of 30 to 100, or whatever that case might be. The problem that we used to find all the time was if we told a client, okay, this product comes in 1800 long, you know, you can change the splashback height, you can do this and that and the other, inevitably they would draw it wrong because we couldn't demonstrate all the variables in a 2D environment and it wasn't parametric. And by the time the project got documented and we were told to supply, we'd look at it and we'd go, either one, we can't make that, or two, we can make it, but it's going to cost you an absolute bomb. I know during the BER projects, which was a few years ago now, a particular product of ours was documented universally throughout that regime, that because of the way it was drawn and because of the way that whole process was just we have to do it this way, never changing the documentation, it works on a modular type scenario, that's how we're going to build all these buildings so quickly. Every product within a particular category was double the price of what it would have been had they just drawn it correctly. We couldn't put in RFIs, it didn't work that way. We couldn't say, but if we change this, can we do that? No, it didn't work that way. So we had control of the data in a BIM environment because we're the ones providing the data. The data goes into the project, they make whatever modifications they want to our models within our constraints, then it comes back to us. We look at it and we go, great, we can make that. That's a standard product for us. That's one of the things I found, and listening to Phil before, I was thinking, you know, you're constantly making bespoke stuff, you know, and it's a different environment, but it's similar in a sense that if you give people too much free rein, inevitably it comes back with a lot of challenges. If you try and lock down a lot of that and you have input into the process, you simplify things in the long run. And to the point where when we talk about for manufactured drawings, we never really, theoretically in the future, and when I say we, I mean Britex, would have to do custom shop drawings, because you in the project would be providing us with the shop drawing because it's our drawing to start with. So you make whatever changes you want in the 3D model, which is reflected in the 2D. You send those 2D drawings to us and we go, yep, great. That's easy. Linking from models to external live sources. So this is in a Revit sense. So you've got your product there, you've got the toilet, you click up your, your type properties, all your data, that sort of thing. So if you want to know more about the product so you can't see it, it's not shown in the geometry there because we've simplified it a little bit, or you want to know a little bit more about installation, or you want to know a bit more about services, you click straight through to the website, you download the PDF straight away. Then if we make a change to that product, or even if the user wants to make sure that the model that they're looking at is correct, you just click on that link and it'll be able to tell them straight away whether that's the most current version or not. So some of this ability to communicate in a removed sense is awesome. Parametric modeling benefits. So talk about in the model lies the truth. Probably went through this before, but for a company like Britex that is a custom manufacturer, so we make a lot of bespoke stuff, gives the ability to lock down parameters that shouldn't be changed. So if you want to go and change the length, that's fine, but if you want to go and change the height, you can't. We've said you can't do that. If you want to try and do that, call us first. Do not go and change this in the model without speaking to us first, because there's a reason for it. It's not like an AutoCAD drawing where if we say this product can be custom manufactured, you can just go and change anything. And then we look at the drawing and go, that's a $15,000 product. It should be $2,000. You know. Detail variables and parameters accurately so we can build min-max constraints. Suggest compatible and prevent incompatible product matches. So there's different things that you can do within the BIM environment where you can add different components and so forth and make suggestions to say, you know, this product should go with this product, do not make this product go with this product, these things are incompatible. I think even just visually too, you know, I've seen a lot of projects in the past where they're using just like placeholder content, so like a placeholder basin and a placeholder tap, for example. The amount of times that I would look at a project and go, that tap won't work with that basin because it's wall mounted and the basin has tap holes in the tap landing, or vice versa, because the actual CAD wasn't really to match the specification and no one had really thought about it. But if you're building a 3D model, you can pretty clearly see if you load a basin in and it's got 3 tap holes on the back and you go and stick something on the wall, it's not really working. Because the data's coordinated, it's such a visual prompter, which I think is great. Correlation between drawing and a schedule. The amount of times that I saw drawings that didn't have a schedule that matched, either the quantity was incorrect. Oh, can we return one of these? We ordered 6, but we only needed 5, and we say, well, we custom made that. And then we're the bad guy for saying we can't take it back. We want to avoid those problems and things like, you know, the schedule correlating correctly with the model. I think that's not really happening a lot yet, but I think, you know, talking about you know, quantity surveyors and construction companies and those sort of people actually using the model for scheduling, that's a huge benefit for BIM. And then visualization. You know, what does this product look like with this product? If I change the height, what's it going to look like? I call it like the virtual Meccano set. You know, we used to make so many products and someone would say, what does this product look like with a left-hand outlet and a toilet roll holder and this and this and that? And we'd say, oh, yeah, look, we'll just go and knock one up, you know, and take a photo of it and we'll show you, you know, it's just not realistic. We'd sell some products that had upwards of 85 variables. Building them in a modelling sense in Revit, for example, not just Revit but AutoCAD, just using Revit as the, ArchiCAD rather, but using Revit as the example, you know, we could show them what every basin at every variable looked like with every component. You know, we could create a render for them if they wanted to. Such a great communication tool from visual. Moving forward a little bit to things that then can add to just about creating basic content. We can do project-based modules and data sets for practical project demonstration. Demonstrate compliance with building codes. So the one on the left-hand side there is actually an ArchiCAD module that we built. It's actually a AS1428 disabled compliant amenity with the circulation space and the exclusion zones built into the fixtures that we supplied. Mostly gimmicky. You're probably not going to copy and paste this room, although Britex would love you to because it's all their stuff. But being able to demonstrate this sort of stuff, this doesn't happen in catalogues. You know, this doesn't happen in catalogues. This doesn't happen in AutoCAD. A lot of this coordination type stuff is really unique to the way that BIM is moving forward and the things that manufacturers can leverage and the value add that they can provide to their clients. The one on the right is actually done in Revit, but same sort of concept. Okay, so this is for all intents and purposes, this is where I see the future in manufacturing and supplier. It's the virtual showroom, immersive product selection. When I say the future, this is already happening now. We are already starting to work with some companies to get this sort of stuff happening. I'll give you an example. Let's just say you make 10,000 litre water tanks. You're not going to bring one of those into an appointment. Vice versa, your showroom is probably out in, you know, if you're living in Melbourne, it's probably out in Campbellfield or somewhere, and Chris Houghton from Petal Thorpe's not going to jump in his car and drive out to Campbellfield to go and see a product. With, you know, this sort of stuff, you can go and build a field of tanks. You know, you can go build a field of tanks, you know, at the correct scale. And you might even be using potentially maybe your Revit content. You know, there's obviously a workflow that goes from Revit into 3ds Max and into a gaming engine like Unity. That's sort of happening a lot now for different purposes. I know it's happening within the architecture space. They're getting clients to walk through their buildings before they're built or before they're, you know, finalised designs. This sort of stuff can happen with manufacturers. You know, you can, let's just say, for example, if you manufacture, you know, kitchen products, you can go and build a building with all of your kitchen products all set up in different formats in different rooms. and the designer can basically walk through your entire showroom. You know, if your content's built to a high enough LOD, you can do that sort of stuff. And I think this is awesome. You know, having the ability to walk into a presentation maybe with an Oculus Rift and a laptop and say, here, walk through my showroom. Let me show you what my products look like in situ in your project. You know, this sort of stuff will move forward really quick. And I think it's the future, but I think it's very much also the now as well. So this is what I think is going to be happening a lot.